Hi, hello. Today we will share with you on the topic of housing best practice in Singapore and Malaysia. Before that, I will explain briefly about the aspect of housing which is the fundamental ones of humans. Therefore, in this context, we will see the extent of differences in the context of housing management in planning between developing countries which is Malaysia and developed countries which is Singapore. In this study also discuss the aspect that involve differences and comparison based on the housing market and the availability of housing units, policies and their application to the population for each country. Okay, next I will explain some of the approach and the government intervention in the aspect of housing planning and policies in Malaysia. Among the policies implemented in housing development is the National Housing Policy, which is the main policy and key in the formation and development of housing in Malaysia. In addition, the National Affordable Housing Policy is also applied, which is a guide and benchmark in the formation of affordable housing. These policies were introduced to provide a new light on government effort and intervention in increasing home ownership to the people and providing conducive, comfortable and safe housing to live in with some development focus and strategies. Apart from that, there are also some fundamental of housing development planning and policies that become support the main policies that involve the housing aspect. Essentially, these policies and planning foundation will serve as translator and main policies in National Housing Policy and National Affordable Housing Policy. Among the policies and basic of planning for the housing aspect in Malaysia are as follows.
Next, I will explain about the current issues housing in Malaysia. So on the residential prices yearly update, it is stated that the median price of a house is at 295,000 ringgit in 2020. The price was increased as in 2019, the house price is at only 289,646 ringgit. If we look at the median monthly salaries and wages in Malaysia, it is recorded at 2,442 ringgit in 2019 and the price was increased by 5.8% from 2018, which is at 2,308 ringgit. Therefore, it is shown that the house prices in Malaysia are beyond the affordability income of households in Malaysia. Next issue is the rising number of unsold housing units. Based on the Berita Harian article, it is recorded that there are 31,661 units of unsold houses in June 2020. The amount increased by 3.3% compared to previous year, which was 30,664 units. It is also recorded that Johor is the highest number of unsold houses, which is 6,166 units, and the lowest number, which only 44 units, goes to Perlis. So the factor of unsold houses is because of the rising price, wrong size of houses that does not meet the requirement, and the failure of developer who fail to offer housing unit that is in line with market demand and attractive packages. To solve all these issues, the policymakers and government should play their roles to work with developers to discuss the provision of affordable housing prices. Besides that, all developers also should start to review the needs of high-priced housing provision and offer more on affordable price of housing. Lastly, the government should enhance more on the existing initiative, campaign and housing scheme, for example, rent-to-own scheme and home ownership campaign.
Alright, next I will talk about the government intervention in terms of policy in Singapore. The government of Singapore had a vision to provide a decent home equipped with modern amenities for all those who need them. From that vision, the Housing and Development Board, or also known as HDB, was established to make a housing policy and provide a public housing to all Singaporeans. One of the policies that have been introduced by the government and HDB is housing ownership schemes that create to solve the housing shortage in Singapore. Through the housing policy that have been made, data shown that 9 in 10 of the resident household were the house owner and 78.7% of Singaporeans live in the public housing that provided by HDB. It has set an example of best practice to other countries around the world in terms of policy making and providing affordable housing for its citizens.
Now, I will continue with the current issue for housing in Singapore. This issue occurs during the pandemic when Singapore's hot housing market faces risk of cooling curbs. The housing price statistic in Singapore increased while the economy in Singapore remained during this pandemic. This issue affected the residents that want to get their first home in Singapore, while hoping that the property price would dip during the hunt. We can see that from 2018, the housing price for Singapore with Singapore dollar 141,100 and it start increasing in line with the economy of Singapore in 2020 for Singapore dollar 153,900. Until July 2021, the housing price had reached Singapore dollar 164,100. For conclude, Singapore boasts one of the world's most effective public housing policies. The government should reconstruct the housing price index for the residents and prioritize for the local residents to get their first home in HDB flats of Singapore. A cooperation with developers will ensure that the housing price index will be reliable and ideal in order to provide housing scheme for the residents in Singapore during the pandemic.
Next, I will present about comparison between Malaysia and Singapore housing market. There are 4 elements that we can compare, which is the supply, demand, price and policy. First of all, the housing supply. As we can see, the housing supply in Malaysia is increased more than housing supply in Singapore, which is 80% for Malaysia and 11% for Singapore. This is because due to increasing population in Malaysia is more than Singapore from 2050 to 2020. Next is demand housing. The demand housing in Singapore is increasing more than demand housing in Malaysia, which is 68% for Singapore and 51% for Malaysia. This is because the price of housing in Singapore is decreasing and slow residential development activity. Next is housing price. The average of housing price in Singapore is more expensive than Malaysia, which is 6 million ringgit for Singapore and 300,000 ringgit for Malaysia. This is because Singapore is the developed country with limited land that causes the price of land very expensive to build or develop a residential activity. Finally is the policy. There are 2 main policy housing in Malaysia, which is National Housing Policy and National Affordable Housing Policy, and also there are 5 others policies. And for Singapore, there are only 1 main policy, which is Housing and Development Board Housing Policy, and only 1 others policy, which is Urban Redevelopment Agency.
In conclusion, for the comparison in housing landscape that have been done between Malaysia as developing country and its neighbour Singapore as developed country, the policy that have been created by each government has its own way in order to help its citizens to own their own home. Each country has its own way based on what is the solution that government think are the best for its own citizen, and also to provide the safe, healthy, prosperous and affordable housing to the people. Finally, we can see that each nation, either developing or developed country, has its unique housing landscape, either in terms of housing demand, supply, pricing and also the policy. And all of this will give an overall view of housing landscape in each country. That's all from us. Thank you.